had just moved in when the young male model across the hall called the police. He claimed I had fallen in love with him, turned bitter when he rejected me, and had been harassing him ever since, banging on his door, threatening him, and even trying to sexually coerce him. When the police showed up, he pointed right at me and started yelling, "Pervert! You knock on my door every night. You even use binoculars to spy on me, and you've been posting my photos online. I've seen you. Standing by your window, staring at me. Always trying to get close. It's disgusting." The neighbors gathered around, whispering and pointing at me. Someone even shoved me, calling me shameless. Women like this are trash. She looks normal. Who would have thought she's a creep? Under everyone's accusations, I slowly took off my sunglasses, revealing the hollow sockets where my eyes should be. "Officer, how exactly is a blind person supposed to peep at anyone?" My voice was soft, but it cut through the noisy room like a sharp spike. The neighbors who had been shoving and shouting froze for a moment. The middle-aged woman leading the charge left her hand hanging awkwardly in the air, forgetting to bring it down. Every gaze locked on my face. Or rather, on the two hollow, empty sockets where my eyes should have been. They were the permanent scars a fire had left me 3 years ago. The officer in charge, a seasoned cop with the surname Wright, paused for a moment before frowning. His voice dripped with impatience. "Cut the act. If you're really blind, a hospital can confirm it." Across the hall, Curtis Lowe's voice faltered for a split second before rising again. "She's lying. She's just trying to get out of this. How could she be blind? Every night, she stands by the window, watching me." Halfway through his rant, his eyes landed on my empty sockets. His voice trembled, and his words lost their edge. "That's disgusting. Seriously disgusting." His shout stirred the crowd again. "Exactly. She's faking it. People these days will do anything to escape punishment. No lie is too low." A young woman, filled with righteous anger, even lunged forward, trying to grab my collar. "You're absolutely vile." Officer Wright quickly blocked her. "Hey, nobody moves. Let the police handle this." He turned back to me. The suspicion and disgust in his eyes were completely unchanged. "You're coming with us." I did not resist. I calmly held out my hands. Cold metal snapped around my wrists. 2 young officers escorted me, one on each side, toward the elevator. Behind me, the neighbors' curses blurred into a chaotic roar. "Scum of society. Get out of our building. Hope you rot in prison." I could not see their expressions. However, I could clearly hear the satisfaction in their voices, the kind that came from grinding someone into the dirt. The elevator door slid shut, sealing off the noise outside. One of the younger officers, probably new, could not help but ask in a low voice, "Are you really blind?" I curled my lips into a faint, humorless smile but said nothing. The other officer patted his shoulder, signaling him to keep quiet. Yet I already knew. In their minds, the scales had tipped completely toward that tearful young man. After all, he was a handsome male model and still a student. I was a woman who lived alone, and always wore sunglasses. In their eyes, I was strange. To them, it was already decided who the victim was and who the offender was. What those people did not know was that sometimes, what the eyes saw was the greatest lie of all. I, a blind woman, could hear things none of them could. For example, when Curtis accused me, his heartbeat was steady, and there was not a single ripple of guilt or panic. The interrogation room in the police station was lit by a harsh white fluorescent light. The air smelled faintly of mildew. I sat in a cold metal chair. Across from me were Officer Wright and a female officer taking notes. Name: Ivy Lane. Age: 28. Occupation: unemployed. Officer Wright slammed his pen down on the table. The sharp sound cut through the room. "Ivy, I suggest you start telling the truth. There's witness testimony and physical evidence. How long are you going to keep denying it?" I tilted my head slightly toward the direction of his voice. My tone was still calm. "May I ask who is the witness? And what is the evidence?" "The witness is the victim, Curtis. And the evidence?" Officer Wright paused for a moment. His voice was noticeably faltering. "The evidence is still being collected. Don't think denying it will get you out of this." His voice rose, trying to overwhelm me with pressure. "Curtis has already explained everything. You moved in a week ago and started targeting him. You knocked on his door every night at exactly 8 p.m. While he was showering, you used binoculars to spy on him from across the hall. Not only that, you even took photos of him and sold them on overseas websites. This is a serious crime. If you confess now, you can still get leniency." I almost laughed. It was impressively detailed. The time, place, behavior, and motive were neatly arranged. If I were not the one being accused, I might have believed it myself. "Officer Wright." I cut him off. "First, I don't own binoculars. Second, I have no so-called tools. My computer and phone were replaced 3 years ago with assistive devices for the visually impaired. They cannot take photos or display images." I paused for a moment. My voice was slow and precise. Third, and most importantly, I am completely blind. There was a brief silence in the room. Officer Wright's breathing grew heavier. I already told you, don't use that as an excuse. Whether you're really blind will be confirmed by a medical examination. Until then, you're the prime suspect. At that moment, the door opened. A young officer poked his head in. Sir, the victim is very emotional. He's been crying nonstop, saying he'll report us to higher authorities for protecting the suspect. Officer Wright's expression darkened instantly. Got it. He waved the officer away, then turned back to me. His voice was colder than before. Do you understand the pressure we're under because of you? He's a top university student. This case has public attention. If we mishandle it, the entire precinct will be held accountable. I finally understood. He cared about the outcome more than the truth. Or more precisely, he was looking for a quick, convenient outcome. The easiest way to get it was for me to confess. So, just to avoid accountability, I should admit to something I never did? My question clearly set Officer Wright off. What kind of attitude is that? Do you even know where you are? Officer Wright let out a cold laugh. Let me make this clear. Once you're in here, don't put on airs. And just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're the victim. You won't talk? Fine. We've got plenty of ways to make you talk. The chair screeched harshly as it was shoved back. He rose to his feet and lowered his voice. Lock her up first. Once we get the warrant, search her place thoroughly. I want to see how long she can keep this up. The door opened again. 2 officers walked in and grabbed my arms, one on each side. I did not resist. The moment Curtis called the police, I already realized that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a setup. Since they dared to go this far, they must have already prepared the evidence. Next, they would search my apartment. Things that were never there to begin with. I would be permanently branded as a voyeur and a harasser. There would be no way to clear my name unless I tore this trap apart first. The cold iron door slammed shut behind me with a heavy echo. I was locked in a temporary holding cell. The room was small. There was only a hard cot and a toilet. The air smelled of disinfectant mixed with stale dampness. I traced the wall slowly, found the bed, and sat down, listening quietly to the sounds outside. Footsteps echoed up and down the hallway, mixed with deliberately hushed whispers. That's the sicko who was spying on people? She looks normal. Didn't expect something this disgusting. I heard she's blind. Probably faking it. Who knows? Either way, she's done for. Their voices were like fine needles, piercing into my ears one by one. I had long been used to darkness. However, for the first time, it felt cold enough to cut. About 2 hours later, the metal door opened again. It was Officer Wright. He was holding a transparent evidence bag. His steps were noticeably lighter. He waved it in front of me. Ivy, take a look at this. Then, as though remembering I could not see, he scoffed and answered his own question. We found this under your windowsill. A pair of military-grade binoculars. There was barely concealed triumph in his voice. And this? Another evidence bag hit the table with a soft plastic rustle. A digital camera. It's full of photos of Curtis, taken from every angle. Filthy stuff. So is there anything you'd like to say now? I did not respond immediately. Deep down, a storm was already raging. That was fast. The evidence was already perfectly in place in such a short time. Officer Wright noticed my silence and assumed I had nothing left to say. He pulled over a chair and sat across from me, his tone suddenly shifting into something almost persuasive. Ivy, you're still young. You're not without options. Why go down this path? Now that the evidence is all here, denying it won't help. If you confess early, I might be able to put in a good word for you and get you a lighter sentence. A statement was pushed in front of me. The sound of paper scraping against the table was sharp and clear. Go on. Press your fingerprint, and this will all be over. I could tell from Officer Wright's tone that he was not taking this seriously. He did not care about the truth. He only cared about closing the case. I slowly lifted my head and faced him. Officer Wright, if I press my fingerprint, does that mean I'm admitting to all the charges? Of course. Including voyeurism, harassment, and distributing obscene images? That's right. Multiple charges combined. Enough to put you away for a few years. I paused for a moment. My voice dropped slightly. My name will be forever tied to voyeur and sexual harasser, won't it? His impatience was obvious now. What's with all the questions? You did this to yourself. I laughed. The sound felt jarringly out of place in the cramped holding room. Is that so? In the next second, I reached out, found the statement, and tore it apart. The sound of paper splitting was sharp in the air. Nothing was left but shreds. Officer Wright froze for a moment. He clearly did not expect that. Why you? Have you lost your mind? He shot to his feet. His voice rose sharply. That's resisting law enforcement. Your sentences just got worse. I lifted my head. My voice was steady and clear. I won't confess to something I didn't do. You can fabricate the evidence. I paused for a moment. But if you want me to admit guilt, I'd rather die. The air seemed to solidify. Officer Wright's breathing turned rapid. Fine. 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 He spat the word 3 times. His voice shook with anger. You've got guts. I'll see how long you can keep this up. He stormed off and shouted into the hallway. Someone get in here. Cuff her. File for formal detention. I want to see how long she lasts. Within seconds, 2 officers rushed in. They yanked me off the bed roughly. Cold handcuffs snapped around my wrists again. They were tighter than before, with the metal biting into my skin. I was shoved forward, stumbling as I was let out. Then my phone rang. The flat, mechanical tone of a blind access phone cut sharply through the hallway. One of the officers moved to decline it. I said, "Let me take it." My voice was calm, too calm for someone being dragged away. The officer hesitated for a moment. "Take what?" "Move." Officer Wright barked impatiently. I said evenly, "If this call delays the result you want, you'll deal with the consequences." That made him pause. In the end, the phone was placed in my hand. I felt for the button and answered. A cold, distant female voice came through. "Ivy, you have 3 days to move out." She paused for a moment, her tone laced with undisguised disgust. "I don't want a disgusting peeping Tom living in my property." The voice on the other end belonged to my landlord, Miss Holt. Her voice felt ice cold, even though it came from the other end of the line. "Miss Holt, that's not how it is." I tried to explain. "I don't want to hear it." She cut me off sharply. "All I know is that you've been here 1 week, and you've already caused a scandal. The building's group chat is blowing up. Everyone's blaming me. How am I supposed to rent this place out in the future? What about my reputation?" Her voice grew sharper and sharper, filled with anger at being dragged into the mess. "Ivy, I don't care whether you really have issues or you've been wronged. I'm giving you 3 days. If you haven't moved out after 3 days, I'll have someone throw all your things onto the street." Then she hung up with a sharp click. The holding cell fell back into silence. Officer Wright's face carried an undisguised trace of satisfaction. "Did you hear that? Feels bad being abandoned by everyone, doesn't it?" He nodded toward his subordinates. "Take her away." I was escorted down the long corridor. This time, no one whispered anymore. Their stares were colder than insults. It was like they were looking at something already condemned. I was pushed into a police car, heading to the city detention center. There, I would wait for what they called trial. Outside the window, the noise of the city slowly faded. I leaned against the cold metal interior, feeling the vibration of the vehicle. Despair surged in like a tide from all directions, slowly, steadily, swallowing everything. Then a calm, professional female voice sounded in my ear. "Ms. Lane, this is Grace Quinn from the Municipal Legal Aid Center. I've been assigned as your attorney. Your case is now under my responsibility." I was slightly startled. Legal aid? I never applied for it. It was requested by the police in accordance with the law. It was as though she anticipated my question. Her tone remained steady. "Under the regulations, your case requires legal representation." I understood. Procedure. It was just a procedure. The lawyer named Grace was probably just like the others. She was already convinced I was guilty. Her job was simply to make everything look more lawful. "I have nothing to say." My voice came out dry. "I didn't do anything wrong." A brief silence followed. I expected her to begin pressuring me into a confession like Officer Wright. Yet she did not. Her tone remained precise, controlled. "I've reviewed the information provided by the police. A pair of binoculars and a camera containing explicit photos were recovered at the scene. The victim's statement is detailed, and multiple neighbors have given unfavorable testimony. Based on the current evidence, the case is heavily against you." Every word was calm and almost clinical, yet completely devoid of emotion. "If you insist on pleading not guilty, once the case proceeds to trial and the evidence is admitted, your sentence will only be heavier." I closed my eyes. The hollow sockets felt dry and empty. "So you're here to tell me to confess to?" "No," her answer was immediate. "I am your defense attorney. My duty is to protect your legal rights, not to decide guilt for either side." She paused for a moment. Then, her tone deepened and sounded more focused. "Now I need you to answer a few questions truthfully. First, are the binoculars and camera yours?" "No." "Second, do you know Curtis Lowe? Have you had any contact with him?" "No. I don't know him." "Third," she paused for a fraction of a second. "Other than vision, do your hearing or tactile senses show any abnormal enhancement?" That question made something in me tighten. She was the first person to notice that. "Yes." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, "Good." It was just one word from her. However, her tone had shifted ever so slightly. It was as though something crucial had just been confirmed. "Ms. Lane, the police will transfer you to the detention center within 30 minutes. Before that, they will ask you to sign some documents." Grace's voice turned colder and more precise. "Do not sign anything. Wait for me to arrive." The call ended. I held the phone in my hand. My cold palm was unexpectedly slightly damp with sweat. There was hope. For the first time since falling into this dark pit, I felt hope. Even if it was as faint as a flame in the wind. The police car soon stopped. I was taken into an office. Officer Wright slammed a document down in front of me. Sign it. I shook my head. I won't sign anything until my lawyer arrives. His expression darkened instantly. Lawyer? Can you afford a lawyer? He let out a cold laugh. I'm telling you, it's useless. No one can save you. He grabbed my hand, trying to force it onto the ink pad. It was at that moment, a calm female voice came from the doorway. Stop. It was not loud, but it was heavy with authority. The movement in the room froze instantly. The sound of high heels clicked clearly against the floor. A woman walked in, dressed in a professional suit. She moved with decisive steps. Her presence was sharp and cutting. Her gaze swept the room, and her brows were slightly furrowed. I'm Grace Quinn, defense attorney for Ms. Lane. Your attempt to force my client to sign documents after she explicitly refused is a violation of the law. She placed a file and her bar license on the table. Her movements were clean and precise. I was assigned by the Municipal Legal Aid Center. Here is my authorization and credentials. She looked up. Her tone was calm but unyielding. Now, I demand a private consultation with my client. Officer Wright's expression turned ugly. He picked up the documents, flipping through them repeatedly, as though he was searching for a flaw. However, he found none. Grace's paperwork was complete, compliant, and airtight. Legal aid, he muttered in disdain but ultimately did not dare object further. 10 minutes. With a dark expression on his face, he led the others out, leaving the room to us. The door closed. There was only Grace and me in the room. The sound of high heels striking the floor was clear and steady, drawing closer with each step. Then they stopped in front of me. A faint, cool scent of paper and ink drifted into my breath. Ms. Ivy Lane. Her voice came out calm, measured, and controlled. In your phone call earlier, you mentioned your hearing is unusually sensitive. Can you elaborate? I did not expect that to be her first question. Still, I did not hesitate. After I went blind, my other senses, especially hearing and touch, became significantly sharper. I can judge a person's build, habits, and even emotional state by the rhythm and weight of their footsteps. I paused for a moment. And I can pick up details most people miss. Grace did not interrupt. She simply listened quietly. Then she asked the key question. Did you notice anything unusual from the apartment across from you? My heart tightened slightly. Yes. I lowered my voice. Curtis doesn't live alone. Grace kept silent. I continued. Before he called the police, I heard it at least 3 times late at night. There were 2 sets of footsteps in his house. Curtis walks lightly but deliberately uses more force in his steps, like he's trying to hide something. The other person's footsteps are extremely light, almost silent. But there's one clear detail. My voice slowed. The other person's left foot lands slightly heavier, and the right is lighter, like an old injury causing uneven weight distribution. It's a male with a light build. He moves carefully and cautiously. These were details I had never spoken aloud. It was because they would sound like nothing more than the imagination of a blind woman to the others. However, Grace did not interrupt me. Even her breathing did not change noticeably. Anything else? She asked. Yes. I nodded. He was searching for something. I heard furniture being lightly moved, and the sound of fabric brushing inside a closet. It wasn't random. It was a deliberate search. I paused for a moment, then said the most important part. And on the day Curtis called the police, his heartbeat was off. It was much faster than usual, but the rhythm was steady. It wasn't fear. I slowly let the words out. It was excitement, like the reaction after a plan succeeds. Silence settled in the room. There was no skepticism and no interruption. There was only Grace's steady breathing. After a few seconds, she finally said, I understand. Her tone remained calm, but it carried a firmer sense of confirmation now. You may still need to stay in detention for a while. Don't get into conflicts with anyone. Keep a low profile. Protect yourself. She paused briefly. Leave the rest to me. Her high heels clicked again. The door opened then closed. Just like that, she was gone. Officer Wright returned soon after. His voice dripped with sarcasm. What? Your savior left already? I told you, stop dreaming. A legal aid lawyer doesn't have that much power. Time's up. Take her away. I was escorted out again. Yet this time, the darkness inside me was no longer completely stifling. Grace Quinn. The name fell into me like a stone into water, rippling outward for the first time. She was the first person who truly listened to the things I heard. That was enough. Life in detention was worse than I expected. I was placed in a shared cell with 8 people. The labels of voyeur and pervert had already spread before I even arrived. I became the target of everyone. My food was knocked over. Cold water was poured on me while I slept. My cane was hidden. However, I did not fight back. I did not ask for help either. In a place like this, resistance only brought worse retaliation. I used my hearing to avoid the most dangerous people. I used silence to make myself seem non-threatening. I was like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake, waiting. On the 5th day she came. In the visitation room, separated by thick glass, I heard her. Her breathing was slightly uneven from fatigue due to long hours of work. However, her voice was still sharp. Ivy, I found something. There was no greeting. She went straight to the point. The tenant registration for the apartment across from you. She paused for a moment and lowered her tone slightly. It's not Curtis. My heart tightened sharply. Not Curtis? Then who? The registered tenant is a 54-year-old man named Julian Vance, Grace said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that demanded my full attention. He's a retired accountant. More importantly, he was reported missing by his daughter 3 weeks ago. I sat perfectly still, processing the information. The damp, stale air of the visitation room seemed to grow colder. If Julian Vance has been missing for 3 weeks, then who is Curtis? I asked. A squatter. Or more likely, someone hired to occupy the space, Grace replied. I heard the rustle of paper as she flipped open a file. I did a background check on Curtis Lowe. He is exactly what he claimed to be, a university student. And a part-time model. But what he left out to the police is that he is drowning. In debt. Over $200,000 owed to an underground gambling syndicate. 3 days before you moved in, a large portion of that debt was mysteriously cleared. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to shift, aligning into a shape that was far more sinister than a simple neighborhood dispute. The footsteps, I murmured, my mind racing back to the late-night sounds I had memorized. The limping man. He wasn't just a guest. He was the one pulling the strings. Exactly, Grace said. And I don't believe they are in that apartment for Curtis's convenience. They are looking for something Julian Vance left behind. But here is the critical part, Ivy. Why did they target you? I touched the cold metal table. I moved in a week ago. Before me, the apartment had been vacant for 2 months. If Julian wanted to hide something where the people looking for it wouldn't easily find it, he would hide it across the hall. Grace finished my thought, her tone laced with a sharp edge of realization. In a vacant apartment. But before the people looking for Julian's leverage could search it, the landlord leased it out to you. You disrupted their timeline. It all made sense now. The fabricated harassment. The flawless planted evidence. The tears and the righteous indignation. They didn't care about sending a blind woman to prison. They just needed me out of the apartment. The landlord gave me 3 days to move out. I said, my voice hardening. If I'm locked up here, my apartment is empty. 3 days is more than enough time for them to tear the place apart, find whatever Julian hid, and vanish. They almost succeeded, Grace said. But they made mistakes. Arrogant ones. What mistakes? First, the binoculars, she said, her voice dripping with clinical disdain. They planted military-grade, manual-focus binoculars. Even if you had partial vision, operating manual-focus optics requires precise visual feedback. A medical examiner has already reviewed your records at my request. Your optic nerves are completely severed. The medical impossibility of you using that equipment will destroy their narrative in court. She paused, tapping her pen against the table. Second, the photos on the digital camera. I extracted the EXIF data. The metadata timestamps show the photos were taken between 8 o'clock and 8:15 p.m. over 3 consecutive days. But the focal angle of the shots is downward, taken from a height of approximately 6 feet. You are 5'4", Ivy. Unless you were standing on a stool, perfectly still while supposedly stalking him, the geometry doesn't match. I let out a slow breath. Grace Quinn was not just a lawyer, she was a scalpel, cutting through their lies with surgical precision. So what's our next move? I asked. I've already filed an emergency motion for bail based on the glaring inconsistencies in the physical evidence and your medical records, Grace stated. The judge signed it 15 minutes ago. You are leaving this place, Ivy. My heart skipped a beat. And the police? Officer Wright. Wright is furious, but he has no legal ground to hold you, she said, the faint hint of a smirk audible in her tone. However, clearing your name in court will take months. And by then, Curtis and the limping man will be gone. The only way to completely exonerate you and expose them is to catch them in the act. They have to break into my apartment tonight, I deduced. It's day 3. Tomorrow, the landlord sends someone to clear out my things. Exactly. Grace's high heels clicked as she stood up. I've contacted Captain Miller, an internal affairs detective I trust. He is assembling a quiet team. But we need probable cause to raid your apartment tonight. We need them to break in and we need to be there when they do. You want us to go back, I said. It wasn't a question. Are you afraid? Grace asked quietly. I thought of the neighbors pushing me, the cold handcuffs biting into my wrists, the sneer in Officer Wright's voice, and the suffocating darkness of the holding cell. No, I said, rising to my feet. Let's go home. The ride back to my apartment building was draped in tense silence. The rain had started to fall, the rhythmic hum of the tires against wet asphalt serving as a backdrop to my sharpened senses. Captain Miller has plainclothes officers stationed at the perimeter of the building, Grace explained from the driver's seat. They won't move until I give the signal. But we need to get inside unnoticed. We use the service elevator in the basement, I instructed. It bypasses the lobby. The motor is old and loud, so I can track its movements. Nobody uses it. Past 10 o'clock. We slipped into the building like phantoms. The scent of ozone and damp concrete filled my lungs as we navigated the basement. Grace's footsteps, usually authoritative, were now soft and deliberate. I guided us, counting the paces. 30 steps from the service door to the elevator. We rode up to the 4th floor in suffocating silence. When the rusted door slid open, I held up a hand, signaling Grace to stop. I closed my sightless eyes, channeling every ounce of my concentration into my ears. The hallway was quiet. To my left, nothing. To my right, inside Curtis's apartment, I heard it. The faint murmur of voices. 2 people. Then a heavier footstep, followed by a lighter drag. The limping man. Silas. Grace had called him after cross-referencing Julian's associates. They're inside, I whispered, barely moving my lips, waiting for the building to go to sleep. I unlocked my apartment door with excruciating slowness, manipulating the tumbler so it wouldn't click. We slipped inside and I quietly locked the deadbolt behind us. The air in my apartment was stale. It felt violated. I could smell the faint, lingering odor of cheap cologne. Curtis had been in here. They must have sneaked in to plant the evidence under the windowsill. Don't turn on any lights, I whispered. I know, Grace breathed back. No, I mean shut off the main breaker. I pointed down the hall. The fuse box is by the front door. Kill the power. I heard Grace move, followed by a heavy metallic clunk. The faint, high-pitched hum of the refrigerator died. The low buzz of the streetlights filtering through. The window blinds vanished. It's pitch black, Grace whispered. I can't see my own hand. I unbuttoned my coat and dropped my cane onto the sofa. A cold, fierce calm washed over me. For the past week, they had dragged me into their world of visual lies and fabricated images. But tonight they were stepping into my world. In the dark, the playing field wasn't leveled. It was entirely mine. We need to find what they're looking for before they do, I said softly. I began to pace the apartment. I knew every square inch of this layout. The 52 steps from the door to the bedroom. The angle of the coffee table. The exact texture of the drywall. If Julian Vance hid something here, where would it be? Grace asked, her voice hovering near my right shoulder. He wouldn't have had much time, I reasoned, tracing my fingers along the baseboards in the living room. He broken while it was vacant. He wouldn't have torn down drywall or ripped up floorboards. It had to be something quickly accessible, yet out of plain sight. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear against the floor. I tapped the hardwood with my knuckles. Thud, thud, thud. Solid. I crawled to the heating vent. I felt the metal grate. The screws were rusted, tight, untouched for years. Not there. I moved to the hallway, trailing my fingers over the door frames. Then I stopped. The bathroom door frame. The trim on the lower left side felt imperceptibly misaligned. To a sighted person, a millimeter gap meant nothing. But to my fingertips, the edge of the wood felt sharp, not sanded down by years of paint. Like the rest. I tapped the wood. Hollow. Grace, I whispered. Here. I heard her crawl over. There's a slight gap, she murmured, her fingernails catching the edge. Give me a second. I heard the metallic slide of a pocket knife. She wedged it into the crack and pried. With a soft crack, a section of the wooden trim popped off. Inside, I felt cold plastic and metal. A small, heavy rectangle. And a thick bundle of papers. A hard drive, Grace whispered, her breath hitching slightly. And a ledger. Ivy, you found it. Before I could reply, a sound froze the blood in my veins. Click. It wasn't inside our apartment. It was the lock on the front door. Someone was picking it. They're here, I breathed. I grabbed Grace's arm, pulling her to her feet. The bedroom closet. Go. Don't make a sound. Record everything. What about you? She whispered urgently. I'm going to welcome them. I shoved the ledger and hard drive under the bathroom sink, behind the piping, and moved swiftly into the center of the living room. The front door clicked open. A sliver of hallway light must have spilled in, but it was immediately cut off as the door shut. Why is it so dark? It was Curtis's voice. He was trying to whisper, but his pitch was too high, laced with anxiety. Shut up, a raspy older voice hissed. The limping man. Silas. She hasn't paid the electricity bill. Just use your flashlight, keep the beam pointed low. A soft click. I couldn't see the light, but I heard the faint rustle of their clothes as they moved forward. Sweep the living room. Check the baseboards, the vents, anywhere a man could. Hide a ledger, Silas ordered. His uneven footsteps dragged across my carpet. Step drag. Step drag. I still don't get why we had to frame the blind chick, Curtis muttered, his shoes squeaking slightly on the hardwood. We could have just broken in while she was asleep. She's blind, not deaf, you idiot, Silas snapped softly. You think you can tear apart an apartment with someone sleeping 10 feet away? We needed her gone. And we needed her discredited. If she ever claimed someone broke in, the cops would just think the crazy stalker was having delusions. My hands curled into fists. Hearing the cold, calculated cruelty of their plan, spoken aloud, ignited a fire in my chest. They were near the kitchen counter. I stood by the hallway, about 10 feet away from them. I reached out and picked up a heavy glass vase from a side table. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it directly over their heads into the kitchen sink. Crash! The explosive sound of shattering glass in the dead of night made Curtis scream. What the hell was that? Curtis shrieked, stumbling backward. His elbow slammed into the wall. Keep your voice down. Silas hissed, his breathing instantly accelerating. Something fell. A cat. She doesn't have a cat. Curtis was hyperventilating now. Silas, someone's in here. I moved. I didn't just walk, I glided. In absolute darkness, muscle memory and sound were my compass. I stepped lightly behind the sofa, circling around to where Curtis was standing. I picked up an old metal lighter from the coffee table and tossed it against the far wall by the door. Clack. There. Curtis yelled. Over by the door. I heard the frantic shift of their clothes as they whipped around. While they were distracted, I stepped directly behind Curtis. I could smell his sweat, pungent and metallic with fear. I leaned in, my lips inches from his ear, and whispered, "Looking for me?" Curtis let out a sound that wasn't human, a strangled, high-pitched gasp of absolute terror. He violently recoiled, tripping over his own feet, and crashed hard into the coffee table. "She's here. She's right here," he screamed. "Where?" "I don't see anyone," Silas yelled. The panic in the room was palpable. I could hear the flashlight beam sweeping frantically, but I was already gone, tucked safely into the alcove of the hallway. I swear to God, she was right behind me. Curtis sobbed, scrambling backward on the floor. "You're losing your mind," Silas growled. But his heartbeat had spiked. His uneven footsteps betrayed his panic. He pulled something metallic from his jacket. A gun. I could hear the heavy, dense shift of the slide being pulled back. "Ivy Lane," Silas called out, his voice shaking with a forced bravado. "If you're hiding in the dark, you better come out. I will put a bullet through every wall in this place." "You're in my house." My voice floated from the hallway. I immediately dropped to the floor and rolled into the bathroom as he fired. Bang! The gunshot deafened the room, tearing through the drywall right where I had been standing. The smell of sulfur and burnt plaster filled the air. "Are you crazy?" Curtis screamed. "The neighbors will call the cops." "Let them," Silas roared. "Find the ledger. Tear the walls open." "I'm right here, Silas," I called out, this time from the kitchen entrance. Silas spun around and fired again. Bang! The bullet shattered my kitchen window. But I had already moved. They were relying on sight, blinded by their own narrow flashlight beam. I was relying on the entire acoustic landscape of the room. Suddenly, Grace's voice pierced the darkness, crisp and uncompromising from the bedroom doorway. "That's enough." A sudden flood of blinding light hit the room. Grace had flicked her heavy-duty, tactical flashlight on, aiming it directly into Silas's eyes. "Drop the weapon, Silas. The police are already outside the door," Grace declared, her tone echoing with absolute authority. Silas shielded his eyes, raising his gun toward the light. "You stupid." Before he could pull the trigger, the front door was kicked off its hinges with an explosive crash. "Police! Drop the weapon. Drop it now." A swarm of heavy boots, shouting voices, and tactical laser sights flooded the living room. Captain Miller's team had breached exactly on cue. "Don't shoot. I surrender." Curtis wailed instantly, dropping to his knees and covering his head. Silas hesitated for a fraction of a second, blinded by the tactical lights. before 3 officers tackled him to the floor. The heavy thud of his body hitting the hardwood was the most satisfying sound I had heard in a week. Secure the weapon. Cuff him. Captain Miller barked. I stepped out from the hallway, my breathing finally slowing. Grace walked over to me, lowering her flashlight. I felt her hand gently grip my shoulder. Are you okay? She asked softly. I'm fine, I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time. They're not as tough in the dark. The precinct was a chaotic blur of noise, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. I wasn't in an interrogation room. I was sitting in Captain Miller's spacious office, sipping a hot cup of tea. Grace stood by the window, finishing a phone call. She hung up and turned toward me. It's over, she said, her voice rich with satisfaction. The ledger you found under the doorframe belonged to Julian Vance. It details a massive money laundering operation tying Silas's syndicate to several local politicians. Julian had been their accountant, but he grew a conscience and stole the drive to go to the FBI. They caught him, but he managed to hide the evidence here first. And Julian? I asked quietly, fearing the answer. They found his body 2 days ago in a quarry, Grace said softly. Silas murdered him. That's why they were so desperate. They knew if the drive was found, they'd go down for a lot more than illegal gambling. I nodded slowly. And Curtis, singing like a canary, Captain Miller said as he walked into the office. He was a man with a deep, rumbling voice that commanded respect. The kid is terrified. He confessed to everything. Stated on record that he was paid to occupy the apartment, frame you with fake evidence, and keep the police distracted while Silas searched for the drive. What about Officer Wright? I asked, remembering the contempt in his voice, the way he had tried to force my fingerprint onto a false confession. Captain Miller sighed heavily. Wright is in custody. Internal Affairs has been investigating him for months. Turns out he's on Silas's payroll. He was instructed to push your case through as fast as possible to ensure your apartment stayed empty. The evidence he supposedly found under your window? Placed it there himself. A profound sense of relief washed over me. The invisible chains that had been wrapped around my neck for the past week finally snapped. I owe you everything, Grace, I said, turning my face toward where she stood. You don't owe me anything, Ivy, she replied, walking over and taking my hand. You saved yourself. You heard what everyone else ignored. You refused to be a victim. I just gave you the stage to prove it. So what happens now? I asked. Now. Grace smiled. I could hear it in her voice. Now I sue your landlord for wrongful eviction, defamation, and emotional distress. I sue the police department for false imprisonment. And you, Ms. Lane, are going to be very comfortable for the rest of your life. 6 months later. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and roasted coffee. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, a beautiful, high-rise condo in the safest part of the city. The noise of traffic was a distant hum, replaced by the soft jazz playing from my indoor speakers. The settlement from the city and the landlord had been substantial, more than enough to ensure I would never have to worry about a place to live again. Curtis was currently serving a 5-year sentence for accessory to murder, perjury, and framing an innocent person. Silas and his syndicate were facing life without parole. As for Officer Wright, he traded his badge for an orange jumpsuit, convicted of corruption, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. The public perception had completely flipped. The neighbors who had shoved me, spat on me, and called me names were publicly shamed. Some even tried to apologize through letters, but I never bothered to read them. Their judgments were as empty as their apologies. The doorbell rang. 2 sharp, distinct chimes. I smiled, standing up and retrieving my cane. I walked to the door and pulled it open. You're 3 minutes late, I teased. I heard the familiar, confident click of Grace's heels as she stepped into the foyer. Traffic was a nightmare, she laughed, the sound bright and warm. Plus, I had to stop and pick up a bottle of champagne. The final paperwork for Wright's conviction just cleared. I thought we should celebrate. I'll get the glasses, I said, turning toward the kitchen. You know, Grace said, leaning against the kitchen counter as I poured the drinks. Captain Miller asked about you the other day. He wants to know if you'd be interested in consulting for the department. Said your ability to profile acoustic environments is better than half his forensic team. I paused, holding out a glass to her. I felt her fingers brush mine as she took it. Consulting for the police? I mused, a slow smile spreading across my face. I walked over to the open balcony doors, feeling the warm sunlight hit my face. I couldn't see the skyline, but I could feel the vastness of the city stretching out before me. A city full of secrets, lies, and hidden truths. Tell him I'll think about it, I said. I raised my glass, the crystal clinking softly against Grace's. To seeing the truth, Grace toasted. To hearing it, I corrected gently. We drank, the cold, crisp champagne washing away the last lingering shadows of the past. I didn't need eyes to know that the darkness had finally lifted. For the first time in 3 years, the world wasn't a place to hide from. It was a place I had conquered. And whatever sounds came next, I would be ready for them.